Google recording this now. Okay. So today's items, Michael and Ruffin, let's talk about your topic, which is review updated proposal for node to participant mapping and SROS2 changes. Who wants to kick that off?
Okay, so you guys see in the design doc the link to poll 274. And a relatively long discussion. Me and Mikhail first kind of came up with an idea of like transitioning using node namespaces and node names to help hint about RCL and what context to load. But as William down below kind of points out that that relationship is kind of non-existent. That contexts are sort of allocated over to nodes, and then the context remains ignorant or unaware of what namespaces the nodes are under or whatnot. So that relationship breaks down if you have multiple nodes per context. But let's maybe we've updated the doc, sort of the latest recent.
Yeah, I guess if we want to summarize what happened is that like a couple of months ago we were like, okay, let's just like people are going to say for each node exactly what set of resources to use. And then we're discussing with Ruffin, we're like, oh, it would be great if we could like infer something based on like node namespaces, or so that it's not fully decorated and so like such a pain for users to have to define everything multiple times. And so we basically went full circle, and we're close to back to where we were 2 months ago, and we had this conversation, which is people are gonna be telling to the nodes via launch files where they should get their information. And so it's not going to be inferred based on node namespace or anything, because this is not necessarily applicable in all of the cases.
So we'll maybe get to that. But thus far, it's sort of from this section header, you can kind of see the general gist in that contexts are something that you would that be allocated, or like you might have multiple context instances per process, and like it could be the case that your process is maybe a bridging process, so it means multiple participants. But what we've kind of settled on is that all the contexts within the process, given the security boundaries of like, the process memory space, that it makes sense if they just load a common context path, which would contain the security artifacts that would be relevant for whatever the process would require. And then there's a specific corner case in DDS domains, or if you have multiple domains, the permission schema in DDS security artifact still allows you to have distinct permissions per domain. So that's sort of been resolved. But then the choice on like how the user, context is a collection of permissions, and so how the user wants to change the fidelity or the granularity of how those permissions get distributed is sort of up to them. They could have, say, every process that they launch gets its own context. So maybe they configure the launch file. So even that, if you have multiple talkers with different names, but if you have multiple talkers, they load different context paths. Or they could have it where all the processes of a given OS user use a common context, or all the processes of a common robot and machine all use one context. And so that could help allow the user to control at what fidelity the IFC could be modeled in with respect to the policy. See, there's the other design doc that touches on contexts, mandatory access control. Some of the adjacent changes we've done that you see in the policy schema is that we've introduced this context of these tags of context in the policy document. That context really just encapsulates profiles. And then we've added an ability to have a metadata tag that might help users. That would be like where you describe and like maybe what domain this particular profile could be attributed to, or the profiles could be attributed to for the multi-bridging case. Clicked on the wrong link in the design doc.
You're just looking at the XSD, right?
So 274 was the oh, I clicked on the first. There we go. So now the policy. Yep. Now we go to DDS security. So there's a few changes that we made to the DDS security design doc, just to rechange the nomenclature from node to context, because that's the primary component. Then we changed like the environment variable. It's not a node directory, it's a context directory. So that allows you to have like these different levels of control on what gets loaded at runtime. So you specify the same kind of security root directory, which would point to where you have all the contexts in your file system. And then at runtime, you would use like a -- context argument, ROS arg, to specify the fully qualified context path, what particular security attributes you want to load from the security directory. And then you can override both of those relationships using the context directory. So if you know exactly where in your file system you want the context to be loaded from, you can have that control.
That's the environment variable?
Yep.
Okay.
And then we've had some discussion on whether the lookup strategy is still meaningful. Like the whole idea of having exact or prefix lookup strategies, that kind of was helpful when the RCL was looking up these node directories based on its node name, and the node name could be dynamic. It has some garbage at the very end, like the ROS tooling.
Right, in order to make them unique.
Yeah, in order to have them unique. So the prefix was kind of useful, that you would just like have _ ROS2 tooling or something, and then all your ROS2 tooling nodes would be able to find that folder. But now that we've sort of had this disassociation between a context name or context path and a node name, is this still warranted? Is this kind of redundant, maybe overcomplicated? So I might like to hear your opinion on whether we should remove all the dependencies on tiny.
Well, so if I, it's a great point. If I write a launch file and I create two contexts with the same name in separate, maybe separate launch files, and well, okay, so the same path, right? Or use the right term. Is that a problem as far as launch is concerned?
So if you had one particular context path in your context directory or your root directory, and you told launch to have these two processes, these two single node processes to load the same context, that would work. It would just the context instances within each process would just happen to spin up DDS participants with the same privileges.
Well, to clarify,
so basically, it's the same thing as if you're running two Dockers. Today, if you're running two Dockers, both of them are going to use the same identity and the same set of permission files. And so
right.
We should, like today, it'll be the same thing. Like the new thing with launch, like all launch does is like pass it to the executable, saying, hey, use that command line argument. And what the command line argument is says, go in that directory to pick up your stuff. And so they would both be using the same set of permissions in the case you said.
Then yeah, prefix seems kind of useless. I mean, I can't imagine a case where it would actually be useful. Can you?
I think like if you still had some crazy setup where you only wanted to specify context paths with some really short thing, and then you wanted to alias these longer context paths in your launch file to these shorter things. But I mean, at that point, you're already manually specifying context
Yeah, I
paths.
haven't been
You
able
might
to find
control
a situation where it was also warranted. So I was also like in favor of getting rid of it, mostly because it also introduced a dependency on a package that is not necessarily that like foolproof, let's say. And so I never audited the package itself, but like I know at least like it had like a lot of warnings and like, we were like raising some flags in some tools. So I would be also happy to
and
get rid of
it
it.
complicated the code base as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm totally in favor for removing that. And, you know, who knows? Maybe someone was really needing that and we end up adding it back. But if we can't think of an immediate use case and it makes the code complex and it introduces a nasty dependency, yeah.
All right. Moving on. So in the design doc, I also added some examples of like how these kind of relationships, how the subsumption of different priorities of environment variables and runtime arcs kind of coexist. All right, and then the meat of the document, the ROS2 security context. Yeah, we've touched on the introduction and the concepts. There's some slight changes to the key store, like I mentioned in the last meeting, that just to make sure that everything's not super flat and like conflict if you happen to use the certificate authority name context or something. We kind of subdivide all the contexts are in the all the context root is context folder. So that's probably where you would set your root context environment variable is to the under key store context. And there's key store private, and that's where you put all the private material that you maybe want to redact after you want to publish the store to your targets. Then you have the public, which you could just leave in place. One thing is we've created a merge and rather than mean to do, I didn't team it, was where there's symbolic links so that we don't have to duplicate the certificate, the public certificate identity within the tree, file tree. Everything just points back to the one certificate authority. So then later, if you have to renew that certificate authority because it expires, you just have to replace that.
And we verified that that works across implementation. I know there was.
It passed all tests.
Okay, very good.
Yep, it's merged. It's in.
It's good. It works. All right, cool.
If it's a problem, we'll have to revert. So yeah, that's sort of the change of the key store directory. All right, runtime. So this is where I think we still haven't reached a consensus or a debate. So I was still leaning towards that if you make an element in a ROS launch file and you specify the context as unqualified, so it's just like context equals foo, not slash foo, just foo. What does that get resolved to? I was thinking it might be helpful if that gets resolved to with the scope of the namespace in the scope of the file, of the launch file. That way you can allow to nest certain launch files and certain node-specific processes you launch are still loading their own kind of unique context, because the namespace still lends it, the hierarchy of the namespace still lends itself well in having a means of separating contexts so they don't collide with each other. You need some way of organizing all your contexts within your context root so they don't overlap. Simple means is to kind of associate that with the relative namespace. The other thing is that when you have to move, when you change a namespace of a node, like at design time, you say, I'm going to change the push namespace in my launch file. That's going to change the inherent permissions that node is going to require. So to kind of make that relationship clear of this interdependency, it might help to explain that, oh, you're going to also have to change the context path. But this is just more of a convention that maybe ROS launch would help afford by doing this introspective launch on, because like RCL is not going to be aware of the namespaces or node names So ROS launch could resolve what relative context paths get mapped to before it provides the -- context arg to the process. So that was my idea, but I think some other people had some points they wanted to raise on like that might be an issue.
That seems to work hand in hand with. Hey, Ted, are you? Ted's not here. Darn it. That seems to go hand in hand with the investigation we've been doing in tying NoDL to ROS launch, right? Where if we can get the context paths, like we're gonna need that at some point in order to actually make any sort of key store. And so you and Ted should probably talk about where that actually ends up going in. I think we can probably work together on that. Regarding the relative context, can you make this might be a stupid question, but in a launch file, can you say, can you, or actually even in, okay, let's ignoring launch files. When I make a node and I say that this has a specific topic, can those be relative or do they have to be absolute?
Maybe you just want to screen share and type out your point.
Yeah, can you just clarify? So you're asking if you can make the topic name relative.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And by relative, you mean
without a leading slash?
No. I mean, you can declare it in your code like that.
And but it will be implicitly given a forward slash? Yeah.
Yeah, basically, RCL is going to take care of that for you. So based on how you actually defined it, it's going to, if you define it as like relative, namespaces are going to be applied to it.
Yeah, that was my question.
And then slash. And if you make it absolute, so if you write a leading slash, it's going to be absolute. And if you use, kind of like in ROS1, like if you make it a private, what we call private in ROS1, which is basically using a tilde,
yep.
Then it's going to be like node namespace fully expanded plus node name plus topic name.
So is that, ignoring the private namespace thing, that seems like a pattern we could follow with the context as well. Would you agree, Ruffin?
That's what I was thinking is before this RCL stuff came to realization, that if you look in one of my upper comments, I have like this table. I had like this table of like how I thought this might all break down based on what the user does and does not provide. So like if it was,
it must be resolved. I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, let me just copy the comment link and paste it.
Oh, can you maybe share your screen, Ruffin? This way we can just follow along with you.
That's actually a great idea.
Present now. Present my screen. Y'all see my screen?
No, not yet.
Oh, pop up, share. There you go. All right, load
there we go.
31 hidden items. I think it might be there. Here we go. So here I have a legend. So like for my legend push notification, that's like if you were to use the push feature in XML node NS, that's like if you set the namespace attribute in node names, name attributes, context attribute, and hard coded if it was hard coded in the file. William also points that you can also hard code namespaces. I forgot here. And then null is like the empty string, no string was provided. Star is mean like nothing really matters. It could be anything. And then dot is it could be particular dot string like the current directory dot. So this is kind of what I was thinking that let's say the case the user doesn't push the namespace. He doesn't provide they don't provide a node namespace attribute and a name attribute and a context, but the hard coded is ham. So then maybe the context could resolve to ham. And I think this is where we were kind of circling back, like, oh, maybe it makes sense to have context default to the node name if it was possible. Because then if you had by default all these nodes without any, they're all just hanging out in the root namespace, at least they wouldn't by default try and load all the same context. but that's like the behavior, whether we want that or not. Whether they provide a bar as a namespace, then it defaults to bar ham. If they specify a node name, then obviously the hard code doesn't matter. If they specify a fully qualified namespace, the push namespace doesn't matter. If they specify a node context, then the node name wouldn't matter. If they specify a fully qualified context, then nothing would really matter. It'd just be spam. So that's kind of a matrix of things we're thinking of. And maybe you could imagine where maybe instead of a relative or an absolute, maybe it's a private with like a tilde slash in front of it. And then that would be inherent from the node name.
That would kind of duck under, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the hard thing is that, you know, if we can't resolve this at RCL, all we have is what ROS launch has, and if the user hasn't specified the node name or the node namespace in the node element, it's kind of vague on like what that's going to get mapped to. That's why I was thinking of just maybe using the scope of whatever node element was specified in. That way, it would still be push and pushable within the composable launch file, but still kind of a very regular pattern. And the idea is like maybe once we get also composable composable tags, like you specify a container in your launch file and then you attach nodes to the container. Maybe the container would also take a context arg, and that would just resolve to based on whatever the namespace the context was first instantiated in the launch document.
Yeah, so what we were thinking is that basically you could have like two sets of like XML tags, which are basically similar to like in ROS1 you have the node tag and you have the group tag, and the group run allows you to group a bunch of nodes together, and we could have something similar for components, which currently doesn't exist in Launch XML. And then we could actually specify like push a namespace for everything in that group, meaning that like this process would get a specific context. And this way we know that this participant will take that context, and all the nodes in that participant will, like in that context, will use the same artifact, that artifact. And we could also use something similar to actually push context when we are including launch files. And so this way I could like get my navigation launch file and like say push in the namespace navigation, and then I know that push in the context navigation, and then I know I will be able to use that set of contexts for that set of nodes.
Does that imply that there is no just to clarify, I mean, that all sounds neat. Does that imply that there's no way to actually do the absolute context then? Like that example you had there where none of the other items matter, Ruffin? Or am I misunderstanding what you were saying there?
Being able to specify the fully qualified context path in the launch file, I don't think is an issue in any regards, because that can be straightforwardly just passed to RCL via the context. There's ROS launch, then if it's fully qualified, you wouldn't have to do any kind of resolving at all.
Okay,
it's
so
the cases where it's relative, where like there isn't a leading slash. What's the way that ROS launch could make it composable and resolve?
Yeah, okay, all right. I think this makes sense. Yeah.
I have a question for everybody though. We've gone over on this topic. We can keep going on it if people are, if we want to extend the meeting by a few minutes today. Is everybody okay with that? Because this seems pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm biased.
Yeah, and you answered first, so clearly you're going to get your way because no one else is speaking up.
No, yeah, sounds good.
I'm with it.
Okay, cool. Okay, let's keep going with this then.
So do folks? I wish we had William or we have Ivana Pio on the call.
No, Ivan's not here.
No, neither of them are here.
God dang. That would have been helpful.
Yeah, by this time in the afternoon, it gets kind of difficult for him because he's on whatever past Eastern time is.
Yeah. Or me.
Whatever's past Eastern time.
I feel so bad for him right now.
Well,
yeah, no kidding.
Atlantic time, I guess.
I wanted to kind of iterate on like if there were any technical difficulties in just having ROS launch support that convention for relative context. But maybe we want to transition. Are there any details that we would want to finalize, at least so that Ivan can proceed with the RCL stuff?
I have one question that does relate to that. I lost it. But where you were talking about how the environment variable interacts with, oh, here we go. In ROS2 DDS security, how the environment variable interacts with the command line flag. I want to clarify. Does specifying the environment variable override the context given in the CLI, or does it the other way around?
You must specify, if you're using security, you must specify the root.
Right. No. I'm talking about the whatever the other one is.
And then that allows you to specify a dash context if you specify the root. But if you specify, if you export the root and you specify a context, but you've also exported the
context directory.
The context directory, which is it's not fully qualified like context path. It is a file system path. So if you specify that overrides everything. So that allows you to I want to run this whole launch file under this one context because I'm debugging or something.
Okay, which works
so
because ROS launch ends up specifying dash context. Is that right?
Well. Whether I think ROS launch picks up the environment variable, I don't think it really matters. I think it would. Yeah, ROS launch could be ignorant of what the security context directory or the security context root is. It just passes what it resolved to the context, but RCL would ignore the context arg if the context directory environment variable was set.
Right. So my point is that seems a little backwards to me. Like I would want the most local change to be the one that affects everything else, and the dash context seems most local to me, except for the fact that I think in most cases that's actually going to be hidden by ROS launch. Is that correct? And what the user is actually setting is the context directory to do this.
Yeah, I think this is sort of similar to what we had with the passing the QoS options. There's this ambiguity on these levels. Yeah. I think it's still necessary in that you set the root so you can change what key store you want. You can set the arg to specify what context you want, and then you can override all of that using an environment variable.
Which is kind of what we have today as well. Which is kind of what we have today, because same thing, today before the change to context, it was impossible to define something at the scale of a launch file or an entire system. And so the only way to actually do that was to do that with the override environment variable. And yes, Kyle, as you said, the command line argument is what launch is going to be using to pass things down. So if you have a context thing in the launch file that you include, it's going to translate into dash context and whatever was in that attribute. So it's harder to override.
Okay, that makes this totally fine then. I just wanted to clarify that.
The environment that context directory environment variable will always supersede what's on the command line.
Right, makes sense.
Okay, all right.
Kyle, did you have any other RCL concerns?
No, I think that's it. That covers it.
There was some very last minute discussion, but I guess it's still in progress. It's been a while since I reread the context design document that Ivan's put together. Apparently, there's going to be a change on how discovery is negotiated as well. There might be a hard-coded. Oh, did William just okay. I'm gonna have to pick up on what William said. Never mind.
I mean, I think it just turns into us needing to throw that into every policy, right?
Yeah, +1, another one.
Throw what into every policy?
Actually, this one is harder, but Raffin, we can discuss it offline. But we need to go back to what we were doing when we were parsing discovery data, because we need a way to specify in a policy file a pure DDS topic and not a ROS topic, because apparently this is a pure DDS topic. It's not mangled.
That can still be done by maybe the translation. You specify that I'm using a DDS vendor, and then SROS is just going to know about the default underlying topics it's going to require.
Which I think we need anyway.
Yeah, that's something we discussed in the past.
You wouldn't have to specify that in your policy, but that's just going to suck because then it's not going to be captured by the policy doing like formal modeling and IFC control.
I'm not sure I'm picturing how it's going to be done, but I don't think we need to discuss it all together. That's fine. You'll point me to an example or something.
Yeah, I think we move on to the next agenda. Yeah, cool. And the next agenda item, Mikhail, is you. Oh, well, he just typed yes. But so Victor, do you want to give us an update on CS for our 1 and 2?
Sure, real quick, just a few seconds actually. So that happened last week. It was a pretty nice experience. I must say we had a full room in the first session, which we organized. And then the second one, we helped disseminate it. And it was also quite filled. Yeah, we had pretty nice speakers. We've managed to get some recordings. The links, I just dropped them there. I apologize, the quality is, probably not the best one. But yeah, we did some home recordings with just a simple camera in a gimbal. So that's as far as we got.
That's
but
awesome.
Yeah, it was
Thanks.
very
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Very cool, man.
Yeah, it was actually a pretty nice experience, and I look forward to do it again. Maybe next time we can join together, most of us. Hopefully with more time. This time actually we were quite late ourselves, but nevertheless, let's see what comes afterward. So yeah, feel free to reach out if there's something that's mistaken or any follow-ups. Happy to do so. And other than that, the overall positive input we got from it is that there is lots of interest in the community, in the robotics community for security. Several groups, companies, and individuals approached and asked about the status of support for security, both at the communication systems level in ROS 2. So I forwarded them to the ongoing discussions and notes we've been putting together in the meetings and minutes. So hopefully someone will join this meetings. Let's see. But yeah, other than that, that was it, and hopefully it's useful for you guys.
Sounds really interesting. Thanks. Michael, because I'm saying your name wrong. Tell us about the you had some comments about static analysis tools for ROS. You know, I think I mentioned earlier we're using Coverity to cover a lot of the ROS packages, but there's also things like Python Black, etc. We should totally work that stuff into our CI/CD. But I spoke for you, so I'll let you speak for yourself.
Yeah, that was the idea. I heard from several actors over the years that they were running various static analysis tools on various parts of ROS 2 and trying to overall improve like quality and security. And so I think that Victor, I guess that's on that kind of stuff that RVD is based as well. And I just learned that Canonical was also running Coverity on most of ROS 2. And so I was just wondering if there is an interest like within this working group and maybe reaching out to some other people, like interested parties, to try to like discuss that, to like put all that together and converge on a set of recommended like either guideline or a shared infrastructure or something so that like package maintainers can leverage it.
That's a super nice suggestion. Totally supported. Actually, maybe directed to you, Joe. You mentioned you guys are using Coverity. I have not tried that one. I actually just recently noted that it is available for open source projects. I wasn't aware of that. I thought it was just a proprietary tool that you could just use by licensing it. Do you guys have any intuition on essentially how does it compare to other existing open source tools?
You know, I find that it keeps state better. So the open source one I'm sorry, not the open source. There's a cloud one you can use that's free for open source projects, and that's very nice. We have the on-prem version, because we wanted to work it into our CI/CD and just use. We wanted to have a little easier use of it. I like that it keeps state. I think it does that better than other tools out there. It is not perfect. Like, it doesn't handle Go right now. But I think it does a very good job at C. It does okay at Python. But it's one of the better tools that when we did a competitive analysis last year, that's what we ended up with. It is the on-prem one. It's reasonably priced, about $1,200 a named user, I think, or maybe $2,000 a named user. It's not prohibitive, but it's not free.
And so just to jump in real quick, we don't necessarily have to fully discuss this now. I just wanted to split the idea and see if there was interest, and then if you want, we can actually set up either a different channel for discussing and putting resources together on experience, or we can just discuss it on Matrix and just come up with a list of things we could do either at the amend lib level, which is adding default linters that would give us more results, kind of what Victor suggested already on the rep, the quality package level, but also on the infrastructure side. And then we could discuss maybe. I don't want to take too much time of this meeting because I wrote 20 seconds, so I was very.
Well, we've already voted to go over, but yeah, let's.
I agree. I think.
Go ahead.
I think there are definitely linters to be written. A couple of the tools Victor mentioned on the quality levels PR I had never heard of, so I very curious to write emmet linters for that. We did one for MyPy, and it's not too bad. But yeah, I think let's carry on this conversation in Matrix. Sound good?
Cool. Okay.
I think eventually you want to surface it to the quality assurance working group because they would.
Yeah, true.
Do they do any ROS 2 stuff? I was just curious. Does the quality working group work on ROS 2, or is it a ROS 1 thing?
I think
they are. They're working. Yeah, they are. As far as I know, I did participate in a few meetings, and I think Andre mentioned also in this course that they had a preliminary port of ROS, which is this tool his group in Portugal are supporting and creating. I don't know beyond that line of work if there's much more going on. Also, I do recall that I think they were requesting for a new lead. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely worth thinking with them, regardless of their level of involvement. That's still good to know that they're looking at us.
Agreed.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, let's go to the.
All right.
Let's go to the last topic.
Right.
Kyle.
I'll keep this quick. Sorry for running over. I just wanted to let everyone know that as of just a couple days ago, we're the working group is the official maintainer of the SROS2 project. We're still working out the organizational aspects of that, but expect to see some coming chatter in Matrix regarding that. I guess that's all I really need to say. But that's awesome.
Cool.
All right. Good news. So maybe very quickly, what's going to be the direct implication on this? Are you guys going to is Canonical going to put resources on maintaining it, or maybe I should just wait to see stuff in Matrix, Kyle?
Yeah, we'll talk more about it in Matrix, but the general idea is we're wanting the working group to move as a team, right? And that's some of that is Canonical, not all of it, but yeah, I mean, we as a working group are going to take on the maintenance of that.
Cool.
Yeah, there were
the main direct implication is that we'll be able to run CI and merge PR. I think that's
yeah.
Yeah, we had two parallel paths, and it didn't make sense to keep them separate between the SROS2 and the ROS2 group. So
cool. All right. Good news, guys.
Awesome. Well, great. We'll update the wiki. Next week, we'll actually talk about feedback on issue 545. Or not next week, 2 weeks from now. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.